Rain drummed against the windshield of the old patrol cruiser, each drop catching the glow of the streetlights like tiny flashes of warning. The wipers dragged across the glass with a tired squeal, smearing the night instead of clearing it. Inside the car, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and damp polyester. Officer Reynolds leaned back in the driver's seat, a grin spreading beneath his mustache as he spotted the dark SUV ahead roll lazily through a stop sign. "Easy collar," he said, his voice slow and smug, the kind that always came right before trouble. "Let's teach her to pay attention." Benson, younger and tense with nervous energy, nodded quickly. He didn't question Reynolds, he never did. It was easier that way. He reached for the lights and the red and blue glare spilled across the wet street like broken glass. The SUV slowed, then stopped beneath a flickering lamppost. Steam rose from the exhaust, ghostly in the rain. Reynolds stepped out first, boots splashing through puddles, his flashlight slicing through the mist. Benson followed a half step behind, hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun, just in case. Inside the SUV sat a black woman in her 40s. Calm. Composed, the kind of composure that made men like Reynolds uneasy. Her hands were already visible on the wheel. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. She just waited, rain tapping softly on the roof like a heartbeat. "License and registration," Reynolds said, the words rolling out sharp and practiced. She turned her head, her voice gentle. "Of course, officer. It's in my purse if that's all right." Her tone was polite, professional. She moved slowly, careful not to startle them. But Reynolds saw something else. Control. Confidence. And to him, that was defiance. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered suddenly. She hesitated, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Is there a reason, officer?" I said step out," Reynolds barked, louder now, and Benson felt the tension coil in his chest. She opened the door, the rain greeting her like applause. Her dark coat glistened under the flashing lights. Benson thought she looked too composed for someone under pressure. Too calm. Reynolds motioned for her purse. "What's in here?" "Just my ID, some papers." He yanked it from her hand before she finished. Papers spilled onto the wet pavement. He crouched and pulled out a laminated badge, squinting at it through the rain. It was official looking, with her picture on it, but he didn't bother to read the words. He tossed it aside. "Looks fake," he muttered. "It's not," she said quietly. He took a step closer, invading her space, his voice dropping into that low, threatening tone he'd perfected over the years. "Don't lie to me," her breath caught. "I'm not—" The shove came fast, brutal. Her shoulder hit the side of the car. She stumbled, tried to regain balance, but Reynolds' hand gripped her arm and twisted. Benson froze for half a second, just long enough to see the woman's eyes lock onto his. They weren't pleading. They weren't afraid. They were steady, focused, like she was memorizing every detail. "Resisting arrest," Reynolds shouted, forcing her down. Her knees hit the concrete. The rain mixed with her blood as the edge of his baton grazed her temple. The sound, that dull, wet thud, echoed through Benson's mind like a bell tolling for something lost. "Cuff her," Reynolds barked. Benson obeyed, hands shaking as he locked the metal around her wrists. She didn't cry out. She didn't beg. She just knelt there, breathing slow, her face turned slightly toward the spinning cruiser lights. "You don't run this city," Reynolds sneered. She looked up at him then, eyes dark, calm, unflinching. "No," she said softly. "But maybe I should." The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy enough to silence the rain. Reynolds blinked, not sure he'd heard right. Benson swallowed hard, glancing between them. Something about her tone, I guess, that cool certainty, didn't fit the script. Reynolds stepped back, muttering something about booking her, but Benson couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a terrible mistake. The woman's gaze followed them as they dragged her toward the cruiser, and even through the storm, it felt like she saw through them, as if she already knew exactly how this night would end. When they shut the door, the lights flared, and the reflection on the wet street told a story of its own. Red, blue, and a streak of crimson fading into the rain. And though neither man would admit it, both felt the same quiet chill, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, they had crossed the wrong person. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time they pulled into the precinct. The streets of Oakwood glistened under the dull orange of the streetlights. quiet except for the low hum of the cruiser's engine. Inside, Reynolds looked satisfied. A wolf who believed he'd just tamed another stray. Benson sat beside him, restless, his knee bouncing against the dashboard. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the scene. The woman sat handcuffed in the back seat, her eyes fixed on the reflection of the lights in the window. She wasn't crying, wasn't trembling, not even angry. She looked like someone waiting for something inevitable. That calm unnerved Benson more than any outburst could have. They parked behind the precinct. The building loomed tall and gray, its windows glowing with tired fluorescent light. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of iron and asphalt. Reynolds yanked open the back door and motioned for her to step out. "Let's go," he said. She stood without resistance. Her wrists were red where the cuffs had dug into them. A faint trickle of dried blood along her temple. Benson hesitated before taking her arm. It wasn't pity, not exactly, but something quieter, something he couldn't name. Inside, the night shift was half asleep. Phones rang, printers hummed, and the old ceiling fan turned lazily overhead. Sergeant Walsh sat at the front desk, flipping through paperwork, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. He looked up when Reynolds entered, dripping water onto the tile. "Got one for processing," Reynolds said, tossing a soggy folder onto the counter. "Resisted arrest. Possible drug activity." Walsh frowned. "At midnight? You sure this couldn't wait till morning?" Reynolds smirked. "Wouldn't want her causing trouble on my streets." The woman said nothing. She stood quietly as they took her fingerprints, her posture straight, movements precise. When Benson brushed past her, she looked at him, not with anger but with a strange sort of disappointment. As if she'd expected more from him. Walsh skimmed the report, sighing. "You boys really like paperwork, huh?" He glanced at her ID, the same one Reynolds had thrown aside earlier. He held it closer to the light. "What's this badge?" "Fake," Reynolds said quickly. She flashed it to Stahl. Walsh squinted. The lettering was official, too official. He opened his mouth to ask, but Reynolds had already started talking again, filling the silence with jargon and justification. Walsh gave up. He stamped the intake sheet and shoved it into a pile. "Fine. Put her in holding till morning." Benson led her down the hall. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. When they reached the cell, she turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "You didn't have to hit me," she said. He froze. "I didn't. Not you," she interrupted gently. "But you didn't stop him either." Her words landed soft but sharp, cutting deeper than he expected. He avoided her eyes as he shut the cell door. The metal clanged, sealing her in. As he walked back to the front, the station felt heavier, like the walls were listening. Reynolds sat at his desk, writing his report, the scratch of his pen loud and confident. "Resisted arrest," he muttered under his breath. "Refused orders. Aggressive." Benson stared at the form, the lies stacking neatly on the page. He wanted to speak, to say that wasn't what happened, but Reynolds shot him a look, the kind that ended conversations before they began. "Don't overthink it, kid," Reynolds said without looking up. "She'll plead out." "They all do." Benson didn't answer. He just nodded and turned away, his stomach tight. Down the hall in the dim cell, Alexis Thompson sat on the metal bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her breathing was slow, deliberate. The badge Walsh had briefly inspected now sat in her jacket pocket again, retrieved quietly when no one was looking. The faint print on it caught the light. Captain Alexis M. Thompson, Oakwood Police Department. She leaned back against the cold wall, eyes half closed, listening to the distant hum of voices outside. Every sound told her something. Who was lazy, who was cruel, who was afraid? She could already sense the hierarchy, the patterns, the rot beneath the surface. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. By morning, the entire precinct would know her name, and by the time the week was over, every man in this building would know exactly who had been sitting quietly in their holding cell, and what she had come to change. The rain started again, light and steady against the barred window. Each drop echoed softly through the cell, rhythmic, certain, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Morning sunlight slipped through the narrow windows of the Oakwood precinct, the kind of pale, unforgiving light that makes everything look more real than it should. The night crew was changing over, coffee pots gurgling, voices low. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and heavy with the smell of wet asphalt. Benson sat at his desk, tapping the edge of a cold paper cup. He hadn't slept. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd seen that woman's calm face staring back at him from behind the bars. Something about her silence had unsettled him. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of someone waiting for the right moment to speak. Reynolds swaggered in, whistling, spinning his car keys on one finger. He tossed a folder onto Benson's desk. "Finish the report. She'll probably see the judge this afternoon, then it's out of our hands." Benson nodded without looking up. The sound of Reynolds's laugh grated against his nerves. Down the hall, the holding cell door opened. Sergeant Walsh was there with 2 uniforms from administration. "Prisoner Thompson, you're being released." All charges dropped. The woman rose slowly, smoothing her coat. "I'm aware," she said. Her voice carried the same composure it had the night before, steady, confident, unmistakably in control. Walsh frowned. "You already knew?" She met his eyes. "Let's just say I was expecting a call." Before anyone could ask more, the glass door at the front of the station swung open. The mayor of Oakwood stepped in with 2 city officials, their suits damp from the leftover drizzle. The chatter in the precinct fell quiet. Officers straightened up, confused. Walsh blinked. "Mayor Wilcox, sir, what brings you here?" The mayor didn't answer. He moved aside, gesturing toward the woman who had just stepped out of the holding cell. "Everyone, please meet your new commanding officer." The room froze. Reynolds looked up from his desk, pen still in hand. Benson's stomach dropped. The woman walked forward, calm as sunrise, her heels clicking against the tile in a rhythm that sounded like judgment itself. She stopped in front of the main floor, turned and addressed them with that same quiet authority that had unnerved them hours before. "My name is Captain Alexis Thompson," she said, her voice steady but carrying through the entire room. "As of this morning, I have been appointed the new chief of this precinct." The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. Reynolds' mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He glanced at Benson, at Walsh, at the mayor, looking for a cue and escape, something. But there was nothing, just the weight of the moment pressing down. Thompson's gaze swept over them, not angry, not gloating, simply measuring. "Last night," she continued, "I experienced Oakwood policing from a perspective most of you will never know. I was stopped, searched, and detained without cause. I was spoken to with contempt by men sworn to protect this city. That experience was illuminating. Every word was precise, deliberate." She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't have to. Her calm was louder than any shout. Benson's throat felt dry. He wanted to apologize, but the words were stuck. Reynolds tried to muster his usual arrogance. "Chief, with respect, there must have been some mistake." Thompson turned her head slightly. "The mistake," she said, "was thinking a badge excuses behavior that disgraces it." The room went still again. Somewhere in the back, a phone began to ring, ignored. "I'm not here for revenge," she said at last. "I'm here for reform. Every report, every procedure, every interaction with the public will now be reviewed. The old way of doing things ends today." Her eyes met Benson's for a moment, not with hostility, but with quiet challenge. "Do better," they seemed to say. Then she turned and walked toward her new office, the mayor following behind. Reynolds exhaled a shaky laugh, but it died quickly in his throat. He slumped back into his chair, the color drained from his face. Benson sat frozen, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade down the hall. In the silence that followed, one thought kept circling in his mind, louder with each passing second. They hadn't arrested a stranger last night. They had arrested their future. And somewhere behind her closed office door, Captain Alexis Thompson began to unpack her files, the first steps of rebuilding a department that had just shown her exactly how much it needed saving. By Monday morning, the precinct no longer sounded the same. The easy laughter at roll call had faded into a quiet shuffle of papers, boots, and unease. People lowered their voices when they spoke. No one quite knew what Captain Thompson had planned, but every officer felt the shift, the sense that the building itself was paying closer attention. She arrived early before the first cup of coffee had cooled. Her office lights came on, throwing soft gold across the blinds. Through the glass walls, she could see the whole floor, the tired desks, the old bulletin boards, the faces pretending not to stare. She stood there for a moment, breathing it in, the weight of her new post and the memory of last week's rain still sitting somewhere behind her ribs. Then she opened her notebook and started making a list. When Sergeant Walsh came in to drop off overnight reports, he found her already cross-checking them against digital files. "Morning, Captain," he said, clearing his throat. She didn't look up. "Sergeant, how often are these reports audited?" He hesitated. "Quarterly. Sometimes." "Sometimes," she repeated, quiet but edged with disbelief. She closed the folder. "That ends today. I want full internal reviews of every incident report filed in the last 6 months. Pull the body cam footage, the dispatch logs, and the disciplinary records." Walsh blinked. "That's a lot of work." "That's integrity," she said. "We'll start there." By noon, the rumor had spread. The new chief was running an audit. Reynolds tried to play it cool. "She's just making a show," he told anyone who'd listen. "Give it a week. She'll settle down." But even as he said it, sweat gathered under his collar. He knew what those files held. The shortcuts, the reports smoothed over, the patterns too familiar to be coincidence. Benson said nothing. He sat at his computer, clicking through call logs with a knot in his chest. When he looked up, he could see her through the glass, conferring with the IT supervisor, her posture calm, her tone direct. She wasn't bluffing. She meant every word she'd said. That afternoon, she called a staff meeting. The officers gathered in the briefing room, restless, whispering. Thompson entered without ceremony, carrying a stack of folders under one arm. "Let's talk about procedure," she began. "Let's talk about the difference between authority and abuse, between instinct and prejudice." The room went still. She walked slowly as she spoke, not lecturing, explaining. "People trust this badge because they believe it stands for fairness. The moment we forget that, we lose the only thing that gives this job meaning." Her voice stayed calm, but every word landed like a gavel. Reynolds shifted in his seat, arms crossed. "With respect, Chief, you can't run this department off theories. We deal with real threats out there." Thompson stopped, turned. "And what threat did I pose to you last week, Officer Reynolds?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through air. Reynolds looked away. She didn't press further. She simply nodded once and moved on, as if the point had already been proven. By evening, new notices went up across the precinct. Mandatory ethics review, body cam policy update, community outreach schedule. Small signs, maybe, but to the officers who had grown comfortable behind their routines, it felt like the ground itself was shifting. Benson lingered after hours, helping to organize the data Thompson had requested. She thanked him quietly before leaving. "You were there that night," she said. "You know what happened. I'll expect you to tell the truth when the time comes." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." For the first time, he sounded certain. When the lights dimmed and the building emptied, Captain Thompson stood alone in her office, looking out at the quiet city. The rain had started again, gentle against the windows. She wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. She was thinking about structure, about rebuilding something that had been allowed to rot from the inside. Change, she knew, didn't start with grand speeches. It started with files, with facts, with the courage to open doors everyone else preferred to keep closed. And as thunder rolled somewhere far beyond Oakwood, she opened another folder, her pen steady in her hand, the beginning of an audit that would soon shake the precinct to its core. The next morning broke gray and heavy. A storm brewed over the city again, low clouds pressing down like a warning. Inside the Oakwood precinct, the tension had settled into the walls, thick and unspoken. Officers moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, whispering when they thought no one could hear. Captain Alexis Thompson arrived just after dawn. Her presence no longer startled anyone, but it still silenced the room. She carried no folders this time, just a small notebook and the weight of the truth she now carried. The audits had begun to reveal what she already suspected: falsified reports, tampered evidence, disciplinary actions buried under bureaucracy. She stood by her office window, watching the streets come alive outside, patrol cars rolling out, the city yawning awake. A reflection in the glass showed her own eyes, steady but tired, the kind of tired that came not from work, but from knowing how deep the work needed to go. Sergeant Walsh knocked lightly. "Captain," he said, stepping in, "we've found discrepancies in the Reynolds files." "Multiple, actually," she turned. "How bad?" "Bad," he said. Enough to raise questions downtown. Thompson took a deep breath. Then let's not wait for downtown to ask. Call him in. Reynolds swaggered into her office 10 minutes later, his usual smirk dulled by unease. You wanted to see me, Chief? He said, trying to sound casual. Sit down, Officer Reynolds, she said, her tone even. He hesitated, then sat. She slid a file across the desk. That's your last 3 months of reports. I've compared them with body cam footage and dispatch logs. He looked at the folder but didn't open it. I stand by my work. Do you? She asked softly. Because your camera went dark during 2 arrests, both involving excessive force complaints. The footage before and after doesn't match your statements. You wrote that the suspects resisted. They didn't. Reynolds' jaw tightened. Those people lie. They always do. Thompson leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. You know who else lies, Officer Reynolds? People who think their badge is a shield against accountability. He didn't answer. She sat back, folding her hands. You hit me that night, she said finally. And you didn't even bother to look at my identification. You didn't see a person. You saw a stereotype. That's not just dangerous. It's disgraceful. He shifted in his seat, his face hardening. You're really going to hang me over one mistake? One mistake? She repeated, her voice quiet, controlled. A mistake is forgetting to sign a report. This is a pattern. You've been operating like this for years and no one called you on it. That ends today. Her tone never rose, but the power in her words filled the room. Reynolds leaned back, trying to smile, but it didn't hold. You're not the first chief who's tried to clean house. You'll see how fast this department turns on you when you start burning your own. Thompson's eyes didn't waver. Then I guess we'll see who's standing when the smoke clears. Later that afternoon, she met privately with Benson. He entered her office nervous, his uniform crisp, his voice unsure. You've been reviewing old footage? She asked. Yes, ma'am. And? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Reynolds, he's been falsifying reports. There's more than I thought. I didn't say anything before because he trained you. She finished for him. He looked down. Yes. Thompson walked around the desk, stopping beside him. Benson, doing the right thing is harder when you've already done the wrong thing. But courage isn't clean. It's uncomfortable, messy. That's what makes it real. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'll testify if it comes to that. I know you will, she said, her tone softening. And that's how this place begins to heal. By nightfall, word spread that internal affairs had arrived. Quietly, efficiently, investigators began collecting files. Officers watched, pretending to work, the air thick with anxiety. Reynolds stood by his locker, hands clenched, watching as his authority, his illusion of control, slipped away piece by piece. Upstairs, Thompson sat alone again. The precinct lights dimmed around her. She could still hear the faint hum of the city, sirens in the distance, rain starting once more against the windows. She thought about everything that had led her here. Every long night, every small humiliation, every quiet promise to herself that someday she would change the system from within. And now, that day had come. She opened her notebook and wrote 4 words at the top of a clean page. This is only beginning. Because it was. The reckoning wasn't over and not even close. And in the city below, under the soft rhythm of the rain, the storm she had set in motion was just starting to rise. The storm outside had turned relentless. Sheets of rain blurred the city skyline, thunder rolling over Oakwood like distant artillery. Inside the precinct, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, the only sound in a building holding its breath. Captain Thompson sat behind her desk, her fingers laced together, eyes fixed on a folder in front of her. Internal affairs had been in and out all morning, their presence both feared and resented. The precinct felt exposed now, stripped bare under the glare of accountability. She could feel it in the air, fear, resentment, confusion. For years, the department had lived under its own code, silent, unchallenged. And now that silence was cracking. Sergeant Walsh entered quietly, carrying another stack of files. Captain, he said, IA found more discrepancies, old ones. Looks like some of Reynolds' arrests were signed off by Lieutenant Carver. Thompson looked up. Carver? Walsh nodded grimly. He's been here almost 20 years, she sighed. Get him in here. When Carver walked in, he looked more weary than defiant. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes told a story of a man who had learned to survive by looking the other way. Lieutenant, Thompson said. You've reviewed the audit results? He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Then you know what we found. He swallowed. I didn't forge anything. I just signed what Reynolds brought me. You didn't ask questions, he looked down. No, ma'am. That's the problem, she said softly. You didn't have to lie to be complicit. You just had to stay quiet. Her words weren't cruel, but they cut clean. Carver's shoulders sagged under their weight. I'm not here to destroy careers, Thompson said. But if you stay, you will follow new rules, real ones. Transparency, oversight, accountability. I need officers who understand that leadership doesn't mean silence. Carver looked up at her, shame and relief mingling in his expression. Yes, Captain. Then prove it, she said. He nodded and left, the door closing softly behind him. By midday, the precinct was no longer pretending things were normal. Reynolds had been suspended pending investigation. His desk sat empty, drawers half open, his nameplate gone. The whispers had shifted from denial to disbelief. Benson walked past the empty desk, pausing for a moment. The space looked smaller now, stripped of swagger. He kept walking until he reached Thompson's office. She was reviewing reports, eyes tired but alert. You wanted to see me? He asked. Yes, she said, gesturing for him to sit. I read your statement. It was honest. I just told the truth, he said quietly. Most people don't, she replied. Not when it costs them something. He hesitated. Everyone's talking, Captain. They think you're tearing this place apart. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes you have to tear something down before you can rebuild it right. He nodded, thoughtful. You really think it can change? She looked out the window, where the rain streaked down in silver lines. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. That evening, Thompson called a meeting in the main hall. Every officer was present, rows of uniforms, stiff and uneasy. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. She stood at the front, no notes, no podium, just her voice. I know what's being said, she began, that I came here to punish, to make examples, to dismantle what's been built. But that's not the truth. I came here because this department forgot what justice looks like when it's honest. The room stayed silent. You don't have to like me, she continued. You don't even have to trust me yet. But you will respect the badge the way it deserves to be respected. That starts today. A murmur rippled through the crowd, unease, maybe even guilt. But beneath it, something else was starting to take root, the faint stirrings of reflection. She paused, then added quieter. Accountability isn't revenge. It's love for what this could be if we got it right. The room stayed still for a long time. Then Walsh stood, slow but deliberate. She's right, he said simply. It's time. One by one, other heads nodded. Even those who disagreed didn't speak. The silence had changed, not fear now, but thought. Thompson gave a small nod and turned toward her office. As she walked, thunder cracked above, shaking the windows. The storm was still raging outside, but inside something else was beginning to clear. That night, she stayed late again. The precinct was empty, the rain now just a soft drizzle against the glass. She walked the quiet halls alone, the same halls where, days ago, she'd been led in handcuffs. Now her footsteps sounded different, steadier, certain. In the reflection of the glass doors, she caught her own image, tired but unbroken, the faint gleam of her badge catching the light. For the first time since that night, she allowed herself a long breath. Change was coming. It wouldn't be easy, but it was coming. And as she turned off the lights and stepped out into the cool rain, one thought carried with her into the darkness. Justice doesn't whisper forever. Eventually it speaks. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Oakwood precinct, the first clear morning in days. The storm had finally broken, leaving the air clean and sharp as if the city itself had been rinsed of something old. The streets outside shimmered with puddles, and for the first time the precinct felt almost quiet. Captain Alexis Thompson walked in just after dawn. Her steps were steady, measured, the sound of someone who no longer had to prove her authority, only to use it. She carried a single folder under her arm, not a stack this time. The paperwork was done. The decisions had been made. Inside the bullpen, the energy had shifted. Officers nodded respectfully as she passed. Some avoided eye contact, still uncertain where they stood with her. Others straightened a little taller, as if they wanted to belong to this new version of Oakwood. Reynolds's desk remained empty. cleared out 2 days ago after his suspension turned into termination. The official memo had gone out that morning. There were no cheers, no satisfaction, just silence. The kind that comes when people realize what accountability really feels like. She stopped at the edge of the bullpen, looking around. The place was still imperfect. The smell of coffee, the clutter of old habits, but it was different now. She could feel it. Small things, softer voices, a little more care. It wasn't revolution yet, but it was movement. Later that morning, she stood before the city council. Reporters filled the chamber, cameras clicking like distant rain. The mayor sat at the head of the long table, his expression grave but supportive. Thompson stood straight, her uniform crisp, her tone clear. In the past week, she began, we uncovered systemic failures in record-keeping, oversight, and field accountability. But those failures didn't happen in isolation. They grew in silence and in the space where leadership looked away. A ripple went through the crowd. Quiet, tense. I don't stand here to shame this department, she continued. I stand here to rebuild it. Every officer who wears this badge will now be retrained under new community standards. Every report will be transparent. Every mistake will be documented, not buried. The era of looking the other way is over. Her words didn't come out as a performance. They came out like truth. Steady, earned, and paid for in bruises and late nights and the memory of flashing blue lights against rainwater. When she finished, the room was silent. The mayor leaned forward. Captain Thompson, he said, you've done more for this city in a week than most manage in a career. You have our full support, she nodded once. Thank you, sir. But the work isn't finished. It never is. That night, as the city wound down, Thompson returned to her office. The precinct was quiet again. Empty desks, half-lit corridors, the hum of computers left on standby. She stood by the window, looking out over Oakwood. The same streets where she had been handcuffed just days before now, stretched out beneath her like a living reminder. Benson appeared at her doorway. Captain? She turned. You're still here, he smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd finish the reports, she nodded. Old habits? New ones, he said. Then, after a pause, you changed this place. She looked at him, a small smile in her eyes. No, we did. And if we're lucky, it'll keep changing, even when no one's watching. He nodded, and for a long moment they stood in silence, the faint hum of the city filling the air between them. Before he left, he hesitated. Captain, that night I should have stopped him. Her gaze softened. You can't rewrite the past, Benson. You can only choose how to stand in the present. He nodded again, and left quietly, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. When she was alone, Thompson walked to her desk and opened the folder she'd carried that morning. Inside was a single photograph. Her first day in uniform years ago, standing beside her late mentor, Chief Angela Morris. Beneath it, a handwritten note. When you wear this badge, remember, you answer to the truth first. She closed the folder, her hand resting on it for a long moment. Outside, the lights of Oakwood glimmered, small, imperfect, alive. Somewhere out there, another patrol car rolled past a stop sign, its siren quiet for now. Somewhere, someone would make a choice, and the right one or the wrong one, and the balance would tip again just a little. That's how justice worked. Never final, always fragile. She turned off the light in her office and stepped into the hallway. The reflection in the glass door caught her. Strong, centered, the faintest trace of rain still on her coat. This time there were no cuffs. No doubt. Only purpose. As she stepped outside, the wind carried the scent of wet asphalt and something new. Not the bitterness of storms past, but the quiet, clean air that comes after. Captain Alexis Thompson looked up at the sky, then down at the city she now led, and under the last fading light of evening, she whispered, not for anyone else but for herself, now, let's begin.